Black Myth Wukong has been one of my most highly anticipated action RPGs since its reveal. Developed by the Chinese studio Game Science, it promised a visually stunning journey through a world inspired by Chinese mythology, accompanied with fluid action combat plus epic boss encounters against legendary beasts that look as if they've been pulled straight from Elden Ring if Elden Ring had you playing as a talking monkey. But the question remains, now that Black Myth Wukong is finally released, is it worth your time and your money? Well, if that's what you want to know, you are in exactly the right place with this video. First, let's talk about setting and, by necessity, a bit of the story. Now, don't worry, I will keep spoilers to a minimum here, and most of what we're talking about has already been revealed by the game's trailers, so as soon as you load into Black Myth, you'll see the power of ancient gods and warriors on full display, and it's quite the spectacle. The game's introduction is fantastic. It immediately gives you a sense of the game's approach to the mythology and the grand scope they've tried to take on with some pretty bombastic characters. Now, if you couldn't already guess, in Black Myth Wukong, you play as a warrior monkey, first godly, then rather mundane, as Game Science here has put together their own rendition of the classic Chinese novel Journey to the West. After an impactful start, both literally and figuratively, you'll be off on an adventure of your own, exploring through dense jungles and dilapidated ruins of civilizations and traditions long buried. In terms of what you'll actually be doing in this game, I'd say Wukong is about 60% action, 30% exploration, and 10% story, but the story beats you come across as well as the voice acting and dialogue scripting is all pretty good. Nothing earth-shattering, but just enough to keep you interested, and I never wanted to fast forward through any of the dialogue, even though you do get the option to do so at times. The story itself is fairly linear, and it actually plays out like a storybook in a sense, with lots of nods to the original literature. All in all, the game is a great adaptation, not a completely original work, just something to keep in mind. Now, the environments on display in Wukong, like I said, are lush, vibrant, and incredibly detailed. And yeah, many have this jungle-themed vibe to start with, which definitely matches the surrounding area, but will occasionally dip you into some dark caverns or shadowy forests, or you might stroll across a snowy mountaintop. The environment types, I think, are sufficient for the story here, but where the game definitely gets you is in the details. Beautiful shadows, ambient lighting, it's in every possible corner of the game world, and more times than I can count, the beauty of this game served to distract me from incoming enemies, leading me to getting smacked upside the head while admiring those surroundings. Plus, enemies often hide in the shadows or tall grass or deep waters and leap out at you when you least expect it. But you need to know that Black Myth Wukong is one of the most beautiful games ever created. Game Science went above and beyond here, especially if you are on PC and can take advantage of some stronger hardware options. The power of rarely used graphical features like volumetric rendering means that every speck of fog and mist can move and shift with the wave of your staff or the running of your feet on the ground in a way that I've never seen in a video game. Beautiful effects like these are woven in throughout and accentuate story elements, such as some characters with mystical fog shape-shifting powers or enemies that utilize black wind attacks to evade or to catch you by surprise. Another amazing technology on full display with Black Myth Wukong is Unreal Engine 5 and nanite rendering, which helps contribute to this amazing rendered detail in every environment. I mean, every rock, every tree, root, and leaf is here with almost photo-like realism. This is honestly something I thought we wouldn't see until the next generation of games came along several years from now. The graphics on display here are something you'd expect only to see in future titles, like maybe The Elder Scrolls 6, games releasing years from now, but here we are playing this incredibly beautiful game in 2024, and it's honestly breathtaking. From environments, we can logically move on to creatures and enemy design, which is also really impressive in Black Myth Wukong. Now, in terms of normal enemies, yeah, there's not a ton of variety here, but normal enemies are essentially just fodder in this game. They're just a way to build up your cash reserves and practice your combos, and sometimes you'll just run past batches of normal enemies to reserve your health and magic for the real main event, which is the sub-bosses and bosses in this game, of which there are dozens. Now, most of the bosses in Black Myth are truly amazing, both in design and function, and I love how Game Science here integrated the surroundings with the bosses themselves, many times to tell a story. For example, in a particularly wet area of the map early on, you'll come across a water-bending samurai-style boss who summons waves and sharp blasts of water to decimate you in addition to his skillful swordplay. Or as you climb a mountain peak in one of the game's later levels, you'll face off against another boss who can harness the power of black wind to appear and disappear at will, and later commands the form of a black grizzly bear. Again, something you would totally see in that specific environment. These really cool beats of environmental storytelling are extras that game science didn't have to do, but the fact that they did makes you feel the love that they have for this title. Now, in terms of boss mechanics, it's all here, and anyone familiar with Souls-like games should feel right at home battling against these enemies. Some bosses have multiple phases or stages, and others just straight up bait you into attacking, only to devastate you with a counterattack. I will say too that at no time during my playthrough did I feel like any of the boss mechanics were simply unfair, like you may have encountered in other times. I mean, if I died for good reason, and there were ample ways for me to solve that combat puzzle if I came back and tried a few more times. Another Elden Ring reference here worth mentioning. Even though this game is definitely not Elden Ring, you can tell these game developers were big fans. If you feel like a boss is too hard, you can simply go back to previous areas and grind a few more levels, a few more skill points to improve your character before trying that same boss again, which I think is smart game design. Most basic enemies do respawn once you rest at a nearby shrine, which is Wukong's equivalent of a bonfire or a site of grace. Though on death, you don't lose anything, not even the basic currency that you earn by killing enemies along the way. But that naturally leads us into combat abilities and theory crafting, which is a huge point of focus in this game. First of note is that you won't be getting tons of weapon options to play with in Wukong, as the staff is and will always be your primary weapon here, so keep that in mind. But you do, however, have different ways to use your staff in terms of movement sets, which the game calls stances. Now these are really interesting, and I haven't fully tested all of them yet, but they do shift the gameplay experience quite a bit. For example, my favorite so far has been the smash stance, which, no surprise, involves focusing on heavy attacks. So putting points into the smash tree will unlock more heavy attack damage, less stamina cost for doing those heavies, health regeneration on heavy attack, and so on. There's also the thrust stance, which, you guessed it, is focused on using that staff as a thrusting weapon instead of the usual sweeping motions. And then there's the pillar stance, which is really unique and has you balancing on top of your vertically placed staff and doing dive bombs and other unique mechanics. Now that's not all in terms of perks or skill trees. There's also the martial arts tree, where you can focus more on your core combat abilities and combo attacks. And there is a survival tree, which lets you do things like increase your health, your stamina, and so on. And then there's magic as well. So with this, you also have spells like Immobilize, for example. This freezes enemies in place, and various progression options here let you do more damage against frozen enemies or increase the stun duration and so on. The more spells become available as you progress through the main story, while more stances become available as you level up. And each time you level, you also gain sparks, which are Wukong's equivalent of skill points. So plenty of skill points to go around, and respecking is also easy as well, and you can do that for free at any of the game's shrines. So in short, there are tons of options here in terms of combat, and I have really been enjoying the skill trees and the different ways you shift and change your build around. There are even spirit summons, which you can obtain for defeating some side bosses, and these you can level up as well. Plus, there are also transformations, which transform you completely into a boss that you've already defeated, so you get their own unique move sets for a short period of time, and these are extremely powerful. So yeah, combat and build craft in Black Myth Wukong, absolutely a banger. This is what you bought the game for, and it does not disappoint. Now you may be wondering, stylistically and mechanically, what other games is Black Myth Wukong similar to? And I think the standard comparison many players will make, especially when you just look at the previews or trailers for Black Myth, is going to be Elden Ring, and I get that, but it's not really the best comparison once you actually play the game and get into it. I mean, yes, Wukong does have tons of bosses with unique mechanics that you have to learn, and yes, you can lock on the enemies and dodge roll, do combos. Yes, you even have access to spells and even spirit summons, similar to Elden Ring as well. And yeah, you also drink from a flask to restore your health, and your flask, or your gourd as it's called, can also be upgraded with more charges. So there is some FromSoft DNA in Black Myth Wukong, especially when it comes to combat mechanics and combat feel, and they've really taken the best part of those aspects, but that's about where the comparison ends in my opinion. Now, in terms of actual game environment, Black Myth Wukong is not an open world game in the same vein as Elden Ring. Now, this is going to be a huge factor for you to consider when buying the game, and I'll admit this can make Wukong frustrating at times, especially when given the absolutely gorgeous exteriors this game has to offer. So basically, most levels in the game are linear. Now, there are some side routes and secret passages, but they all for the most part lead right back to the golden path that the game wants you to take. I mean, the developers here have even gone as far as to include this golden particle effect that leads you from one shrine to the next to help you progress the story, and that's really the core gameplay. I mean, if you think about this, Black Myth Wukong coming from a traditional Chinese novel, this is the gamified version of a story, of a novel. Now, if you want to test the game environments or you want to veer off that golden path for just a few seconds, you're going to quickly come face to face with an invisible wall. And I think this is where some gamers will get frustrated. Invisible walls are literally everywhere in this game. But remember, this is not an open world game. It's not Elden Ring, it's not Skyrim. It's at best an action RPG on rails with some hidden side areas. If you ever played Greedfall back in the day, yeah, it's like that, but much better in terms of actual gameplay. Now, I know the lack of a truly open world may be harsh for some, but personally, as I found myself playing and engaging the game more, this became less of a negative for me and actually felt more like a design feature. And I really didn't mind it after a while because I was engrossed with the environment, with the unfolding story, with, unlocking more upgrades and my perk tree progression that I just wanted to keep playing, and the hours started to fly by. So what I discovered with this simple format is that there is a certain advantage to a very clear linear progression to a game, especially when it looks this beautiful and plays this great. And put another way, in massive open world games like Elden Ring, I often find myself faced with decision paralysis, basically not knowing where to go next or what boss to take on or what gear to get, because there's just so many options. And oftentimes what happens with games like that, and again, speaking for me personally, is that without any clear direction, I actually start to lose interest after the game's opening, sections. I know there's more to do, but there's so much more to do without any specifics that I lose focus and eventually I stop playing. I think the difference here will definitely come down to, how many hours you're going to spend in the game as well as replayability. You might only spend 30 to 40 hours playing Black Myth Wukong and, seeing everything there is to do and trying out multiple builds. Whereas, the open world games, Skyrim, Elden Ring, you could possibly play those for hundreds of hours. So you'll need to decide for yourself if this more linear journey is something that you're okay with. With so many open world games on the market, it was actually refreshing to get a tighter, more focused gameplay and story experience that I could just move from map to map and advance the story and my character without getting overwhelmed. So for what it was, for me again, I really liked it. I know it's not for everybody, but I think if you approach Black Myth Wukong with an open mind and focus on the moment-to-moment gameplay experience, you may not even miss the fact that it's not open world, and you'll probably really like it too. But of course, that is just my opinion. If you guys have played the game, let me know what you think down in the comments section below. Have you been looking forward to this game? And if you've tried it already, has it met your expectations? As always, thanks again for watching. I hope you're doing well. Stay safe out there, and I will see you around in the next video.